from the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. This is Pitt Medcast. Welcome to our read aloud of The High Resolution Life. I'm Elaine Vitone. In this episode, we revisit our summer 2015 magazine feature, written by Michael Fitzgerald, read by Elizabeth Martinson.
Most people don't really shoot for the moon, but Ernest Sternglass made sure we could send images from it. Imaging technology developed by Sternglass allowed video feeds to be sent from space to Earth in 1963 and was later used to transmit images from the moon. The iconic video images of the first lunar landing are etched in our collective memory.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
The contributions of this physicist and inventor were far-reaching, beyond a trip to the moon and back. He helped create digital X-rays, ban atmospheric bomb testing, and then some. In both his radiology career and his public health activism, Sternglass was a nuclear reductionist. Sternglass spent 30 years as a faculty member at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine and died in 2015 at the age of 91. For Sternglass's career path, we have Albert Einstein, as well as Sternglass's parents, to thank. Sternglass's family had fled Germany in 1938 when he was 14, and 2 years later he finished high school in New York City. The young man's early passion was theoretical physics, but his mother, who was a physician, thought a physics degree would make him unemployable. So Sternglass instead enrolled in electrical engineering at Cornell. After he finished his degree in 1944, he volunteered for the Navy. World War II ended just before he was due to ship out, and he began working at the Naval Ordnance Laboratory. Results from his studies there on secondary electron emission were applied in night vision systems. You may be wondering what secondary electron emission is. Einstein's description of the photoelectric effect, in which beams of ultraviolet light dislodge an electron from a metal, opened the field of quantum physics and won him the 1921 Nobel Prize in Physics. Secondary electron emission is a related phenomenon to the photoelectric effect. It happens when an additional electron or electrons are emitted. Sternglass came to believe that the accepted theory of secondary electron emission might be wrong, so he wrote to Einstein about his observations. To his surprise, Einstein wrote back and invited him to come to Princeton. Sternglass later noted how remarkable it was that, as a young man with no advanced degree in physics, he would be asked to meet with the most important physicist since Newton to hash out his theories. Sternglass spent 5 hours with Einstein. The esteemed scientist wore baggy gray pants and slippers, hair seemingly electrified by his brainpower, just as Sternglass had seen in pictures. Einstein took Sternglass to his study, where Einstein showed him some of his work toward a grand unified theory of physics, combining quantum and classical mechanics. Einstein bemoaned that he would never know if this work mattered. They also discussed the atomic bomb and Einstein's fears of it being used again. In a 2013 story, the science publication Nautilus recounted that meeting and how Sternglass suggested that in secondary electron emission, every electron should be considered, not just the outermost ones, as is the case in the photoelectric effect. Einstein reportedly said,
"That sounds reasonable to me."
Sternglass would probe this question for years. He was right. During their 1947 meeting, Einstein asked if Sternglass planned to go to graduate school in physics. Sternglass had been seriously considering this, against his mother's wishes, and said yes. Einstein admonished him.
"Don't go back to school. They will try to crush every bit of originality out of you. Always have a cobbler's job. Always have a job where you can get up in the morning, face yourself, that you're doing something useful for humanity. Because nobody can be a genius every day. Don't make that kind of mistake."
Sternglass said he came away from that meeting a changed man. He did go undergraduate school in physics at Cornell, but his PhD would be in applied and engineering physics. The two would continue their conversation through letters in the years to come.
Perhaps reactions occur in which multiple electrons simultaneously transfer energy to one proton. According to quantum theory, this is somewhat conceivable, also not probable. Your results concerning the photoelectric effect argue convincingly for your hypotheses. In any case, your result is important and further pursuit of the method is necessary.
Nautilus called their correspondence one of the 20th century's most important disregarded pieces of science, at least a generation ahead of its time. Sternglass's experimental data from work at Cornell later suggested a path to creating a sustainable energy source using low-energy physics. Sternglass knew that what he was doing was not explained by conventional physics. Einstein proposed that Sternglass was seeing electrons act collectively to produce a neutron in a low-energy nuclear reaction. This idea was unprovable at the time, but recent research suggests it's possible. The same year he met Einstein, 1947, Sternglass and his first wife had a baby. In their son's first year, he began having developmental issues, including being unable to sit up. Sternglass's first thought was that it was a genetic condition, caused by radiation damage. His father was a dermatologist. In the 1920s, X-rays were often used to treat skin conditions like acne, but his father never wore a lead apron. It nagged at Sternglass that his dad had possibly damaged a gene and passed it on to Sternglass, who had passed it on to his own child. The baby turned out to have Tay-Sachs disease and would die at 2.5. The tragedy presaged Sternglass's shadow life as an anti-nuclear activist. More immediately, though, he continued his scientific life examining the subatomic. The year before Sternglass finished his PhD at Cornell, Westinghouse's research division hired him to study nuclear instrumentation and investigate secondary electron emission and its applications in low-light imaging and other areas. The job meant moving to Pittsburgh, a city he would grow to love. At Westinghouse, he also kept Einstein up to date on his experiments with secondary electrons. Einstein's last letter to him was in 1954, 13 months before the great physicist's death.
With kind regards to you, your Albert Einstein.
By the 1960s, Sternglass had become concerned about the public health effects of radiation, including low-level exposure. Other researchers, among them MDs, had concluded that low levels of X-rays administered to pregnant women were significantly increasing the rate of childhood leukemia and infant mortality. Studies showed that the exposure of the public from atmospheric bomb testing resulted in a similar level of exposure. In 1963, Sternglass published a paper in Science on disease rates for children exposed to radiation while in the womb. This was some of the first epidemiological work on the impact of fallout from nuclear bomb testing. He testified in front of the Congressional Joint Committee on Atomic Energy in favor of a treaty banning testing above ground, underwater, and in outer space. The treaty was ratified. Sternglass felt that this was one of the major contributions of his life, according to his son, Daniel Sternglass.
T-minus 10, 9, 8. We have a go for main engine start. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Exciting things were happening at Westinghouse, too. A low-light imaging system based on his work went up on an early satellite and broadcast video back from space in 1963. Daniel, who was roughly 5 at the time when the feed aired on their black and white television.
I remember very clearly my father jumping up and down in excitement when the first surveyor landed successfully on the moon with a soft landing.
The technology was key to imaging several missions, including Apollo 11.
30 seconds and counting. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 25 seconds. 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
During the first moon landing in 1969, NASA Mission Control commented to the Command Module astronaut in lunar orbit, Michael Collins, "I guess you're about the only person around that doesn't have TV coverage of the feed."
Neil and Buzz, the President of the United States is in his office now and would like to say a few words to you. Over. Would be an honor. Go ahead, Mr. President. This is Houston out.
Hello, Neil and Buzz. I'm talking to you by telephone from the Oval Room at the White House. And this certainly has to be the most historic telephone call ever made. I just can't tell you how proud we all are of what you...
Sternglass's work at Westinghouse resulted in 9 patents. By the 1970s, several applications, including heat and radiation sensors and image intensifiers, would be developed from secondary electron emission tube work. In the late 1960s, space-related budgets were feeling cuts to NASA funds. So after a 6-month sabbatical working with Nobel laureate Robert Hofstadter at Stanford, Sternglass moved to the University of Pittsburgh to develop electronic imaging and medicine. He became professor of radiology and director of radiation physics. Sternglass worked with a number of scientists at Pitt, including Donald Sachin, who was finishing a PhD in medium energy physics at Carnegie Mellon University when Sternglass brought him into his lab. He was already a very senior person, a very famous inventor, Sachin notes. The stuff he did at Westinghouse was brilliant. They started with a laboratory in Presbyterian University Hospital. Later they would add a second lab in Scaife Hall. Sachin called him Dr. Sternglass, and Sternglass called Sachin Don. Ultimately, Sternglass led the group that developed advanced X-ray imaging at Pitt. This new approach used sensors rather than film and operated like a modern digital camera. A lot of people at that time were concerned about the effects of radiation on people. He wanted to do something that would reduce radiation and still give good quality pictures, Sachin said. Not only did their approach reduce the X-ray dose,
they were able to highlight more detail than could be seen on film using image processing, which is similar to Photoshop today.
The result gave doctors the ability to see the true extent of a tumor's growth. Sternglass and Sachin predicted in 1983 that digital systems would replace film. The advance was inevitable, they said, and would mean radiology likely will be performed at the ultimate theoretical limit dictated by the quantum nature of X-rays. Carl Furman, a Pitt professor of radiology, considered Sternglass a visionary.
He was certainly a pioneer in digital imaging and its potential for reducing doses of radiation at a time when most thought that X-ray film would never be replaced.
The Sternglass-Sachin partnership lasted for nearly 30 years, well into Sternglass's so-called retirement. Even after his second wife, Marilyn, took a job at Indiana University. The Sternglasses moved to Bloomington, Indiana, but the retiree continued to come back to the Pitt lab to work. Outside of radiology circles, Sternglass was better known for his activism. In 1967, Pittsburgh became ground zero in a debate over the Plowshare program, an effort by the U.S. government to find peaceful uses for atom bombs. One was Project Ketch, a plan to use atom bombs to create an underground storage cavity for natural gas in central Pennsylvania. Sternglass wrote an op-ed in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette arguing against it. He helped spark intense debate over the issue, and Project Ketch was scotched. Sternglass also published a 1969 article in Esquire, arguing that fallout from advanced nuclear weapons tests could have severe repercussions for infant health across the United States. The article was controversial, not least because some of the sources of Sternglass's statistics voiced concerns about the way he had used their numbers. His critics could be intense, his son Daniel remembers.
I was in around 7th grade, and I said to him, "Don't these personal attacks bother you after a while?" And he said to me, "Sometimes you have to judge a person by their enemies."
He clashed regularly with U.S. government and industry officials about issues pertaining to nuclear fallout and what levels of emissions from nuclear power plants were safe. Sternglass was afforded the academic freedom at Pitt to pursue issues and ideas he felt were important, beyond medical imaging. At times, the university stood up for him when government officials were unhappy with his often controversial positions on the health effects of living in a nuclear age, and for this, he was grateful. Sternglass and Pitt physicist Bernard Cohen engaged in a heated debate about whether fallout from a Chinese nuclear bomb test might affect Pennsylvanians. Sternglass and Pitt biologist Frederick Gottlieb expressed concern about the impact of contaminated fresh milk on pregnant and breastfeeding women and their children. Cohen said he was not personally alarmed at the risks. Sternglass said, sarcastically, "Are you pregnant?" And under his breath he snorted, "Personally alarmed. Humph." The two continued butting heads over the years. As recently as 2008, Cohen wrote a rebuttal to an op-ed in which Sternglass suggested that 2 Pennsylvania nuclear plants should be converted to run on natural gas. In 1997, Sternglass published a memoir called Before the Big Bang. In it, he outlined his ideas about the origins of the universe and particle physics. Sternglass's original theoretical models of the universe's creation predicted that the Higgs boson particle would not exist. His thoughts on Higgs boson evolved, yet he felt it was unclear what the final resolution of the structure of an elementary particle might be. Sternglass once told an interviewer that his ideas might not be validated until long after he was dead. That, he said, was all right. You have to take the long view.
Thanks for listening. This read aloud is based on a summer 2015 PittMed magazine story by Michael Fitzgerald, which you can find on our website, pittmed.health.pitt.edu. That's Pitt with 2 T's. This episode was produced by Elizabeth Martinson, with yours truly, Elaine Vitone. Our executive producer is PittMed Editor-in-Chief, Erica Lloyd. Klaus Saylor played Albert Einstein. PittMed magazine is published by the University of Pittsburgh's Office of University Communications and the School of Medicine. All rights reserved. Sound effects courtesy of NASA and freesound.org. See our website for a full list. And special thanks to Pittsburgh's own Skylar Brimeyer, aka Sleep Movies, for our music.